So this video is going to be about Windows, which, I don't know, maybe I'm bandwagoning. I know that people really crave Linux content, but there's some important questions that I want to think about and focus on in this video as it concerns Windows, because Windows is still the dominant kind of desktop platform for most people. And, recently there's just been a ton of videos talk about how much worse Windows has gotten over the years. And even most recently, you see like Gamers Nexus talk about how they're going to start implementing Linux benchmarking, and they've been talking about doing their own like self-hosted media servers and stuff like that. You see other gaming channels like Hardware Unboxed talking about, hey, why is Windows getting worse? Feels like it's getting worse. And everybody's talking about this, and it seems to beg the question, why would Microsoft do that? And I know a lot of people are going to have very like pat snap answers about, profits and capitalism and other bullcrap like that. But really, from a software provider's perspective, why would you intentionally make a product that people don't like as much? And there's got to be some rational reasons. I mean, look, look at Microsoft's logo. Windows is the logo. It's the thing that built Microsoft into what it is, right? Now, Windows is not their core anymore, but it's still the logo. And so why would you make it worse? And so I think from some perspectives, it probably isn't worse. It's just maybe not fit to what people want, and that makes people feel like it's worse. In other cases, worse, maybe for other reasons. So what I've done in this video is we're just going to take a look at the finances. There are a lot of people who believe that, capitalism is ruining everything. But I mean, look, Windows wouldn't exist without capitalism in the first place. So, you win some, you lose some. And so I've went back to like 2012 and looked at Microsoft's financials to see if we can tease out some of the way their business has changed over the years and how Windows fits into that. Because 2012 was the release of Windows 8, which most everybody hated. And one of the reasons that everybody hated it is because it really focused on like a touch UI. And it was a drastic change from Windows 7, which was very, start menu driven and very mouse and keyboard oriented, to something very, very touch. And that bothered people because there was a conflict between Windows and Microsoft's vision of what UI was going to be and the way people still use computers. And I think, they jumped the gun. They thought things were going a direction that people didn't want to go. And so very quickly after that, they released updates, and Windows 10 actually got released to market in July 2015. And so we can go back and look at the financials during this time period to try to look at what Windows was during that era. And so back in 2012, if you look at the breakdown of Microsoft's revenue, you had most of it coming from commercial. And so this is where all of their developer stuff was housed in their segment reports. And then Windows lived in devices and consumer. And it was a pretty healthy chunk of the business. If you look at the percentage of revenue right here, 44% of their revenue in 2012 was coming from the sector of the business that housed Windows. Now, again, most of it was coming from dev back then already, but still a very healthy proportion of their business coming from Windows and kind of the personal computing area. Now, when you look at their operating income, though, and you look at the margins on these businesses, there's where some differences start to show up. So they're making a lot of money on the commercial side, and the margins are massive. They're doing like close to 50% margin on all the business-oriented commercial developer stuff, whereas the home game, they're pulling about 20% margins. And even over the next couple years, because again, the big release, you know how financials work, this 2012 was actually the midway point of 2012. Their financial year ends like end of July or something like that, end of June, end of July. And so really the Windows 8 big push where you get the big new changeover to the new system hit 2013, and they got a lot more kind of margin out of those sales because I'm sure a lot of the development costs were housed in like 2012 and prior years. And so even with that big new release of Windows 8, you're looking at 23 to 30% margins. Now, look, these are huge operating margins because this is software. You look at their other product lines, all their dev stuff, and they're running 50% margins. Now, if we go back even further, what did they look like back in the golden era, right? Everybody before the Twin Towers fell. Let's go way back to 2000. So I went back and pulled their 2000s. This is again reporting mid-year 2000, so 1999 to 2000. Well, Windows back then was still about the same proportion of their business, but it did have much higher margins. Back then, Windows was close to 60% margins in the year 2000, their fiscal year. Dev stuff was still much higher margin, but Windows was just super profitable back then. Now, what changed in the meantime? A lot more internet. I would guess probably a lot more piracy. A lot of stuff went from physical media, more and more digital downloading started to happen around this point in time. And so they did a reorganization back in like 2015, 2016, somewhere in there. And so from then on, they kind of reorganized the way their segments are reported. And so from then on, the section of the business where Windows lives is called More Personal Computing. And as we go forward, 2014, 2015, 2016, you see that the branch of the company where Windows lives is still a pretty healthy proportion of the company. Now, here they've split out the business side of things, the dev stuff, into productivity and business processes and intelligent cloud, and the non-home stuff is still biggest proportion of the revenue. But again, where Windows lived was still a major core part of the business, producing upwards of half of their revenue. But you do see that the profitability really declined in this area of time. I think that, if you look at the way Windows gets delivered, most people aren't actually paying for it. The way people get Windows is they buy a computer and Windows is already installed via OEM licenses, or they have Windows at work and those are volume licensing, which, don't pay as much per copy. And I think piracy is a big thing for Windows during this time period too, but I think this is where Microsoft had started to shift what they viewed Windows as. And I think it starts in this time period. You really see the shift where Windows starts to become a funnel. Because if you look at the profitability, the productivity and cloud-based stuff really just made a lot more money. Every dollar revenue here really captures a lot more for them than Windows. Windows is expensive to develop, and even if you buy it, a regular retail license of Windows just doesn't cost that much. If you go out to buy a license for Windows Home, it's $139 directly from Microsoft, and let's face it, nobody does that. Nobody goes to Microsoft and pays $139 for Windows Home. Everybody goes online and buys a key from one of these key shops, and that costs like $30 to $40, or they just go find an ISO and never activate it, which means they're basically paying nothing. So like I said, in 2015, Windows 10 gets launched, and there's quite a bit of adoption initially in Windows 10, but what you start seeing is that the revenue here for the personal computing segment kind of flattens off. I mean, if you look 2016, 17, 18, 19, 2020, there's not a ton of growth here. You look from 2016 to 2019, over these 4 years, that revenue goes up. That's, 12% in 4 years. That's not a lot of growth. You easily get 5+ years on a license of Windows. So even if you think about full retail pricing, right, you spend $140 on Windows Home and you use that for 5 years. That's less than $30 per year for your operating system. And again, most people are spending more like $30 for 5 years, which means you're spending like $6 a year on your operating system. So when you've got a product and you're not making as much money on it, you figure out how to make money on it. And I think what Windows became during this time period, with Windows 10 especially, this was when they started putting more and more, hey, let's funnel you into our cloud services. Let's get you on, they really shoved Cortana pretty hard in there. There was a lot more kind of tying stuff into the web during this time. And I think this is why. Because if you look at the profitability, it was much higher for their like online oriented systems. If you look at their cloud, if you look at their productivity, and this is where like Microsoft 365 starts to kick in, those were just much more profitable products. They're subscription based, and subscriptions mean, pointed out, if somebody's spending $10 a year on your operating system because you paid $50 for a license key and you use that thing for 5 years, they make that much money every month if you use like Microsoft 365. And so they're now basically using Windows as the bait in the trap that gets you funneled towards using OneDrive, using Microsoft 365, trying to get you into those subscription services because, well, that's how they make money off of it. They're probably not making that much money off of your Windows use. Now, some big shifts happen along this time. Let's go to 2017. This is one of the big shifts that you will see with Microsoft and their overall philosophy. So what I'm showing you here, on the left, this is their 2016 10K, and on the right is their 2017 10K. Now, this is at the very top of their annual financial report that goes out to all the investors. And again, if I scroll up, you'll see this is literally, you've got all the lawyer stuff, you've got the index, more lawyer stuff, and then this is the initial statement by the company about their business, right? Our vision. And so if you look at the 2016 version, it says Microsoft is a technology company whose mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. Our strategy is to build best-in-class platforms and productivity services for a mobile-first, cloud-first world. So again, even way back then, cloud was their main thing. And like I said, with Windows 10, which had already been released at this time, they were pushing more and more, let's try to get people into the cloud stuff because frankly, that's where we can make more money off of them with subscriptions. Now, 2017, we see a big shift in this language. So 2017, Microsoft is a technology company whose mission is blah, 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 blah. Same thing, same first sentence. We strive to create local opportunity, growth, and impact in every country around the world. Our strategy is to build best-in-class platforms and productivity services for an intelligent cloud and an intelligent edge infused with artificial intelligence. Now, again, this is as of like July 2017, they had put AI front and center in the first paragraph of their vision. All right. A lot of people talk about corporatism and short-term perspectives. Microsoft hasn't had short-term perspectives. They've actually had long-term perspectives. You start looking at the way they did Windows 8, they had a long-term vision of what UI was going to be. They just got it wrong. You go back to 2017, they're talking about AI everywhere, and this was 8 years ago. They were talking about AI everywhere. And this one, I would say, they didn't get wrong. They have continued down this path, and you see this start to show up in their revenues. After this shift to all the cloud and the AI focus, you start to see their revenues really start to take off. 2018, 14%, 2019, 2020, 2021, you just see double-digit growth. Revenue just boom, 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 boom. And it's mostly occurring in their kind of professional development stuff and in their cloud, right? So if I zoom out, you can really see it taking off in this intelligent cloud. 2017, 2018, look at the productivity and cloud stuff just really just blow up. And again, they are making more money in the personal computing stuff, but it's not growing like the other segments. You can see as a proportion of their revenue, it falls off during this time period. So Windows is becoming less and less and less of their core product over time. You see this big shift in the late 2010s to 2020. And you also see in the profitability, those segments of the business are way more profitable than the Windows and personal home business is. And again, this is why I think during this time, you started to see Windows 10 trying to shuffle you more and more into their OneDrive, into their Microsoft 365. Hey, use Cortana, use our online services, get you shoved more into that stuff because, well, it's just way more profitable to get you on that subscription. So Windows 11 comes out in 2021, late in the year. So this is, COVID's been ongoing for a year and a half by now. And COVID actually changed Microsoft quite a bit as a company because of all the shift of businesses and life to like online, Zoom meetings and all that other stuff. And in that context, Windows 11 was developed while they were in this big shift to push stuff to cloud, push stuff towards AI, get people into Microsoft 365 and OneDrive and the online subscription revenue because that's just way more profitable for us. And you can see in 2020, the revenues jump quite a bit from 2019. And then you look at 2021 and it's just massive. 17.5% growth in revenue year over year because, again, they just crushed it. They saw the future with all the cloud stuff and really, like during COVID, just crushed it in this line of business. You see from 2021 to 2022, just massive revenue growth over here. Kind of lasted pretty well through COVID, and it fell off a bit in 2023 once people started to return to office a bit. But by this point, you can really see how after 2022, Windows and the home computing side of things is now like a fourth of their business. Again, you go back, it used to be close to half, now it's close to a quarter, and the vast majority of their business is just, again, dev tools and cloud. Now, profitability in the Windows segment did remain pretty high through this, but remember, there's more than Windows in the personal computing. And so as like the revenue and the income stagnates, and here you can again see that, the profitability is still there, but it's just way, way less than what they're making in their productivity, business services, and cloud stuff. I really feel like this is why they are shifting more and more to Windows is just the bait. It is the funnel to get people into, hey, if we can get you onto our cloud services, we can get you to pay for those cloud services. If we can get you in the door, we can move you to these much more profitable business segments where we do make more money. We can charge you subscriptions and people will pay for that. Here's something that I think may show it a little bit better. They actually do report just the revenue from Windows licensing. And you can see starting back in 2012 to 2025. Now, again, they did some redefinitions during this time, but, a lot of years, the growth is very, very low. And you've got some years where it's regressed quite a bit. And so from 2024, from 2012, you look at a total change of 34%. So they're making about 34% more revenue from Windows in 2024 versus 2012. And this is inclusive of commercial licenses and all that stuff, which amounts to about 2.5% growth per year. That's not a lot in this world where if you look at the growth of their cloud and their commercial stuff, the way Office works, they just, again, Windows isn't making that much money for them. And so here's the latest year, right? As of mid-year 2025, if you look at their Windows and devices, it's smaller than the revenue they get from LinkedIn. Gaming, bigger than Windows. Of course, Microsoft 365 and all the server and cloud stuff just way, way more. The search stuff, you think about how crappy Bing is, search and news advertising, and that's not far away and it's growing more. So it's pretty crazy whenever you look at this stuff that, Windows has become again, I think it's more of just kind of a legacy product for them. I'm sure the development costs are pretty high considering the revenue that they're making on this thing. Because, you think about the profit margins on gaming, people pay for games. Most of these games are not being given away. People are paying money for that. Whereas Windows, yeah, this is what people are paying for Windows, but the ratio of who's paying to who's using Windows is much lower than for games, right? If you play a game, you've probably paid for that game. If you're using Windows, did you really pay for Windows? Well, it was probably on a license key or an OEM key, or it came with your device, which means as a fraction of, product that's out there. And so again, if you're looking for why is Windows getting worse, I think it's buried in these numbers. People don't really pay for Windows. Windows doesn't make them that much money. And they make money whenever you do stuff with Windows that goes into Microsoft 365, that goes into a cloud service, because you will pay for that. Microsoft 365 costs $100 a year. Now, again, I don't know how many people are doing this, but if you think about, again, if Windows retail is 130 and you're only doing that once every 5 years, the cheapest Microsoft 365 plan's $100 a year, and they've got you because it's cloud, which means if you don't pay, you don't get it. Whereas with Windows, you don't pay, you can still get Windows for the most part. If you're a business, it makes a lot of sense to use Microsoft 365 because $6 a month per user, yeah, I mean, that's a good deal. You get the online version of all the Office stuff. Now, if you want the real Office stuff, you're up to $12.50, per month, which is still, for a business, that's not bad. You get all your Office tools. And this comes with the desktop apps, right? And so you're not just online, you actually get them real installed local apps for $12.50 a month for each user. And that's not bad for a business, because for a business, you get support, you get everything always up to date, and you've got all the services there. And this is why Microsoft makes a lot more money on their commercial and cloud-based offerings, for no other reason that people actually will pay for it, and you won't pay for Windows. And so with that, this is why Windows gets worse. As much as people want to blame profit motive and all that other stuff, the fact is, if they don't make money, they can't produce the software. People that use Linux, I think a lot of them don't understand that Linux isn't free. They just aren't paying for it. People are paying for Linux behind the scenes. Now, the numbers are going to be a lot smaller because Linux is a nonprofit, it's donations. But look, I mean, they brought in almost $300 million of revenue, and that's what you call it in a nonprofit. It's still revenue. Now, the Linux Foundation cannot consistently spend more money than they bring in every year, or the Linux Foundation will go away. So even nonprofits have to make a profit. I mean, expenses can't be more than revenue year after year after year, or they go away. And I think it sometimes, people see open source and it's free software, but it's not free, right? I mean, and that's kind of a meme. Free software is free, but not free as in beer sometimes. And it costs money to make Linux. And this isn't even your distro. This isn't necessarily your desktop. This isn't a lot of the tools. This is just like the Linux kernel and stuff, the Linux Foundation stuff. And here's where, again, people that get mad at these for-profit companies, I mean, who do you think pays for Linux? Because you don't, for the most part, right? People aren't contributing. Platinum members, frickin' Microsoft. Yep. Microsoft is one of the major contributors to Linux. Intel, Oracle, Red Hat, right? Huawei, Meta, companies people hate because of what they do and how they make money. If it weren't for them, Linux wouldn't be what it is. And this is part of it. Like, everybody has to eat. Software costs money to develop. And I think with Windows, what's happened is where they make their money isn't really from you. Look, I'm not trying to point the finger, but the fact is that regular people, gamers, and people that use their computer, for the most part, don't really want to pay for Windows that much. Again, we are okay paying $100 once every 5 years, which is $20 a year. $20 a year is basically what people will pay. And if you want more than that, F you. People are mad about it. That's not going to pay for a whole lot because it's not open source, right? Their developers have to eat. And the fact is that businesses will pay for Windows. And the last thing I want to talk about is Windows updates. Why are they forcing security updates? Why is it forced? Why can't you disable that stuff very easily? Why do they overwrite your settings and things like that? You know, if you've never read a 10K, companies will talk about major risk factors to their business. One of the major risk factors is cybersecurity, data privacy, and platform abuse risks. And they are not just worried about script kiddies. They talk about, look, nation states, right? State-sponsored organizations, cyber criminal groups. There are just constant ongoing threats. And since Microsoft Windows is the biggest surface to attack, they get attacked all the time. And they talk about this stuff, right? And they disclosed in 2024 that they had found a nation state attacking their products, right? Gaining access to Microsoft email accounts, and this stuff happened. And you can look this up. It's the Midnight Blizzard attack. It was a Russian-based threat actor. Here, they even straightforward, again, this is not me throwing shade. If you look in here, it says, look, it's a Russian state-sponsored actor, Nobelium. And so this was a big deal for them because, again, they're a public company. This is a big issue. Security is a big deal to them. And if you read through this whole risk assessment, security is a major thing, right? So Windows makes most of its money from the corporate environment. We've already talked about home users aren't paying that much for it. And so that's where security is a really big deal because you've got all this, business process information that people could get access to. And Microsoft bears a lot of legal liability there. It's one thing to think about if you're using Linux and you get hacked. If you're a business, right, you don't really have recourse there. It's open source software. There's nobody to blame for the lack of security. But if you're using Microsoft and Microsoft stuff gets hacked, you might have some recourse there if it's found that Windows did a really shoddy job of securing their system. And so Windows bears a lot of financial risk here. And so part of the reason they force updates on people is because one of the big problems they have is people running out of date software, right? Not running the update is a problem because they might have something they know about that they have fixed and people won't push an update. So they have now forced these things on people and people don't like it. And so here you'll see product vulnerabilities can persist even after we have issued security patches if customers have not installed the most recent updates. So why are they forcing updates? Well, part of it really is security. I mean, I know we say, well, security's always the thing that they say, but it's also not always false. Now, again, yes, they update things that aren't just security, and they are taking advantage of the fact that they've got you over a barrel if you're using Windows, but a lot of it is security also. And so that is something that, yep, they have the ability to do, and if it minimizes their risk, they will do it. They will take your system and update it even if you don't want to, because they're worried about the legal liability that they face because they provide all these software systems. So we can start answering the questions. Why is there AI everywhere? Why are they shoving it into everything? And the reason is that's been part of their corporate vision since 2017. That has been one of the primary focuses. They believe that AI is the future. And so for the past 8 years, they've been working at more and more pushing AI into their systems because they really feel like that's the future. And I would say in 2025, they're not entirely wrong. That's where everybody has now started going in the past few years. They were there early on this thing, right? Everybody's talking about AI now, and they've been talking about AI for a long time. Now, not everybody likes that because of how it forces them into constantly connected stuff, but I think a lot of people, if you had the opportunity to use AI in a purely offline, self-hosted way, Lots of people would actually like that. The problem is not necessarily the AI, it's the data mining that gets done, and it's the subscription models and the always connected part that I think people don't like. I think people don't mind AI sometimes as long as it's not cloud and it's not data mining them. Why all the cloud forced integrations? Why is Office 365 being pushed every time you turn around? Why are they putting those ads in the menus and lock screen? Why is OneDrive the default for everything? And the answer is because it makes more money. And the side point of that is that you won't pay much for Windows, right? I mean, you will pay for extra cloud drive space. You will pay for Office. You will pay for OneDrive, more space if you need it. But very few people are going to pay more for Windows. And that means there's only so much they can make out of Windows without getting you onto some cloud stuff. Why all the forced updates? Legal and financial liability, plus obviously the ability to push stuff on you that they want and you don't. Yes, you don't like that, but again, you're not willing to pay more, and so they will protect themselves, right? Financially and legally, they're going to force updates for security purposes. And then once they have the ability to force updates for security purposes, they're also going to force updates to get you to do the other stuff that they already have been pushing for, like pushing you towards AI with a new update, pushing you into the cloud with a new update. Yep, they're going to do that because, well, they've got the ability to force updates and they've got the justification with security problems, and that lets them piggyback this other stuff in there too. Windows is the entry point into their systems. It is the gateway drug. They get companies hooked on it, they get people hooked on it, and then they can parlay that into the much more profitable aspects of their business. And I would point out once again, just look at how much money they make from Microsoft 365. Right? I mean, they have now just abandoned basically Office in general, and it's now 365 because they want to integrate everything into this cloud environment. Cloud's great because they can always pull it from you if you stop paying. So it gives them a way to actually get money from you. And the Windows is just the platform, right? And more, I think they will care less and less about Windows because as more stuff goes into the cloud, they don't actually need Windows as much. If they can get you addicted into the cloud delivery of the Office suite, they no longer really need the Windows that much. Now, the gaming's still a thing, but again, if they can get cloud gaming going, then that means the actual operating system becomes less and less of an issue. And the more stuff they can get on the cloud, they can get rid of a lot of problems. One thing I will point out about Linux is it's not as suitable to a corporate environment. And this is one thing I haven't even talked about, is that because so much is derived from commercial licensing, that means they bake in a lot of management ability so that the people that actually own the computers in the corporate environment can manage those computers. Windows has a lot of enterprise like management stuff that Linux has less of. I think it has it, but it's not as nice from what I've heard is what Microsoft has for all their enterprise management. And that's a big thing. Like, Windows is built for its main users. And I think at the end of this, we can draw some conclusions. Microsoft really wants to herd you into cloud stuff because I think that gives them a much higher revenue stream per user. I mean, not just is it more profitable, but they will actually just get more money from you. If they can charge you $6 to $10 for OneDrive every month, that's way more money than you're paying them for Windows. And they're building Windows more and more for enterprise, right? The enterprise management features that allow all this control over the computer from like remote access stuff that allows them to push all these things onto your computer. It's because, well, that's where they're really making the money on Windows to begin with. The home licenses probably aren't that big a deal. They're making it for their core customers, and that's more and more of these businesses. And the business wants to be able to manage all their devices and limit security problems and do all this stuff in cloud because it's way easier to manage for them. And I think more and more Windows is going to be less of a focus for Microsoft because I think the more they can get stuff into the cloud, the less Windows is necessary as the gateway drug into their system. Like if Office is all delivered online in the cloud, that works for Mac, that works for Linux, that works on your phone. It doesn't matter anymore what operating system you're using. And I think that simplifies Microsoft's problems across the board. Now, I don't know, I'm not saying they're going to abandon Windows. I don't think they will. They still make a lot of money from it, especially in the corporate environment. But certainly for the home user, it's just not as big a deal. And they are willing to make you mad because, well, you won't pay for it anyway. They're not making money off of you for the most part. You're sort of their customer, but for the most part, Windows is freeware and it's bait in the trap. And that's the way I see it these days. So this is for better or worse, kind of the way it looks to me. So anyway, that's probably where I should stop. This video is going to be stupid long if I don't stop it somewhere. I could ramble on forever about this stuff. You know, I hope that it's maybe shown you something that you haven't seen before. I know these are not necessarily all the main arguments that people go on about, but I think this at least makes it logical. Why would you take your flagship logo product and make it something that so many people dislike? And I think it's because, well, the people that are really mad aren't really the people paying you. And that's part of the problem. So anyway, that's all for me. As always, if you got feedback, you know, there seems to be a lot of Rage Bay AI comments coming out these days. You can feel free to join them down below. I appreciate it as always. Thanks.